And welcome back to Ohio Maine's Business. The current state of the economy has renewed concerns about outsourcing and offshoring and their effects on the U.S. workforce. President Obama addressed the topics during a recent trade visit to India, and those words became lightning rods leading up to the midterm elections. Well, joining us now with the bottom line and a business perspective on outsourcing and offshoring, John Gray, Assistant Professor of Operations at Ohio State's Fisher College of Business. John, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. I think it's good to start off with defining the terms. First of all, offshoring. What exactly is it?
Offshoring is taking an activity and moving it to an offshore location, such as India or China. And that activity could be managed by your own company still. It still could be wholly owned by you, whereas outsourcing is taking an activity and having it managed by another company. But that other company could be right here in Ohio. So the terms are actually often misused during the election.
They're often interchanged and misused.
Yeah, they'll say we need to stop outsourcing. Really, they mean need to stop offshoring when they're talking about job losses.
But you can have a situation where there's offshore outsourcing. The two can combine.
Certainly.
Explain that.
Oh, it's quite common. If you were to have your product produced by a contract manufacturer in China, or take your IT operation and have a company in India do the entire IT operation for. That would both be offshore and outsource. So that would be called offshore outsourcing.
Despite what we've heard about, these things carry a negative connotation because we think that jobs are, in many cases, some jobs are going overseas. But other countries do the same thing. Right down the road in Marysville, we have Honda. Right. They offshored. Is that correct to say?
That's correct. Yeah, Honda has set up a huge operation in Marysville, Ohio, and that spawned all sorts of suppliers around there. And certainly Ohio has benefited from Honda and other companies offshoring here to Ohio.
Specifically the advantages of offshoring for a company to do this. Why do they do it, and what's the advantage?
Well, from a company perspective, usually the advantage is cost. If you have a high labor operation, even with China's increased emerging economy, costs are still very low there. It's $1 an hour still in most areas for an employee, for a manual laborer. So high labor, you get some cost benefits, and also you may want to enter one of those markets. Those economies are growing and the consumers are starting to purchase more and more. That may be a way to get access to a market, is to offshore to India or China, for example.
And outsourcing, advantages of outsourcing.
So again, outsourcing may not be to another country, it could be just to another company.
Right.
And often you have companies that take a tire manufacturer in the auto industry. It used to be that back in the 1920s and 30s, the auto companies would make their own tires. Makes more sense to have a company that specializes in tire manufacturing and have the auto companies outsourced to them. And the benefits there, the company you outsource to gets benefits of economies of scale, they get deep knowledge of tires, and you can benefit from that by getting them at a cheaper price and a better quality possibly even than you could do in-house.
On the flip side of things, the risks of outsourcing and offshoring. Start with outsourcing.
Start with outsourcing. Well, outsourcing, when you outsource an activity, another company is now managing it. So their incentives are to improve their own profits in the long term. And some companies have done a great job, take Honda again, of developing deep relationships with their suppliers where they align incentives through long-term relationships. But that's very difficult to do. If you outsource products or services to a company and they develop some skills that are going to be hard to get somewhere else, you have a risk that you could be locked into that relationship, and those companies could possibly jack up the prices or hold you hostage a little bit in the relationship is one common risk.
And the risk to offshoring.
Well, so again, thinking about products or services, think about products. You've sent a product to be produced overseas. The monitoring costs can get out of control if you start having quality issues. You have longer lead times. You have a risk of port shutdowns. You have maybe different quality expectations in some of these countries. And even in some countries, you have a risk that a host government may choose to change their policies.
I was thinking about offshoring. It seems like you lose a little bit control, and that's tough for some of these companies, particularly maybe a smaller company, that there's a loss of control. Is that right?
That's definitely true. And a lot of smaller companies will actually use brokers, and then there's a whole other layer between you and the actual operation. And so there's an even deeper loss of control.
It can get really complicated.
It can. And I did also want to mention all the currency things going on now. One other risk of offshoring, of course, is the currency valuations changing not in your favor. And that's certainly been happening in China lately and may continue to happen with what's going on now.
Final 30 seconds here. The trends in both outsourcing and offshoring, where are we going here?
Outsourcing, it's hard to say. I mean, there's a great move towards outsourcing in the 90s, and that slowed down a little bit. Offshoring seems like it might be slowing down a little bit due to the currency issues I just discussed, increased realization of some of the risks and monitoring costs. costs have been increasing in the emerging economies. At the same time, our unemployment's been a little higher, and there's been a little more wage pressure here, which maybe has leveled off the cost to some degree.
John Gray, assistant professor